Hey, Maya here, and I would like to present to you a story time about my time that I lived abroad in Egypt. So I lived in Egypt for 2.5 years, from 2015 to 2018. And I wanted to talk about some of the experiences that I had that pointed to the fact that, and reaffirmed the fact that native indigenous Egyptians are Black. Native indigenous, I'm not talking about the ones that you see today that are of Turkish descent and of Arab descent and of European descent, because Egypt has been colonized for thousands of years by Arabs, Turks, and Europeans. And quite frankly, the history has been completely whitewashed to the fact that somehow magically an African country is now non-African or non-Black African. So let's get into it. I remember I was caught off guard several times while in the street. So in Egypt, there's a lot of sexual harassment, and women definitely have no type of societal equality, and can be treated pretty bad. So when I was in the street several times, I would get things yelled at me, racial slurs, and but in contrast, I've had some interesting things said to me while on the street as well. So one of those really interesting things was that a couple of times I had men drive past me and they would say ya asliya, and asliya in Arabic means original. And I was like, why are they calling me that? Like, what? I mean, I'm not from Egypt. Trust me, I don't want to be Egyptian. I'm not from Egypt. I am proud to be a Black American, all right? Creators of hip hop, a world phenomenon, all right? So I don't want to be Egyptian. But I thought it was interesting that just a rando driving past called me Asliya, which means original. So time goes on, a couple of weeks go by, and someone else calls me, and this is within my first couple of months in Egypt. And so, and another thing that people would say they'd be like, Yasamra, which means like, hey, dark-skinned girl, right? And somebody says Yasamra, and I'm like, I say hey balek, which means like shame on you, like have some manners. And he's like, no, I'm calling you that. It's, your skin is beautiful, you're dark or whatever, and inti asliya, come on. So he's like, yeah, you're original too. But I'm like, no, I'm not from Egypt. He's like, oh, well, you look like the Nubians, you look like the original Egyptians. Now, I find that very interesting. So 2 random men on the street tell me that I look like the original Egyptians, which they claim are Nubians. Okay, at this time, I had never gone to Upper Egypt, which is where most Nubians live, where Nubian civilization was and started and still persists. Now, ancient Nubia dates back to 7,000 years ago. Nubians inhabited Egypt over 7,000 years ago. They built all those famous temples that you see, not the pyramids in Giza, that's in Lower Egypt, which is closer to the Mediterranean Sea, which is in Cairo, Giza. But they built all the temples you see in Luxor, and Aswan, Asai too. And, at this point, I hadn't spent time with Nubians. I didn't know too much because, I'd been in Egypt for a couple of months at this time. So fast forward a year, and I have this new roommate, and she's Egyptian, but she's Egyptian of Turkish descent, and her mom visits our apartment all the time. And her mom is, she's a proud Turkish Egyptian woman, and out of nowhere one day when she was serving us dinner at our apartment, she's like, Maya, Sheklik Asliya, and what that means is like, you look like the original people. She's like, yeah, your face, like, it's like the statues that we see. And at this point, I'm like, okay, whatever, that's what you think, that's what you say. But still, what these experiences are telling me is that there are groups of people in Egypt, and these people were non-Black Egyptians. They weren't Nubian, they weren't the Black Egyptians, they were Arab. They were Egyptians of Arab and Turkish descent. okay. And so I thought to myself, okay, so there are people who are woke in Egypt and know that the indigenous native people, meaning the first peoples of this African country, were black. Because now remember, the black race was the first race. The out of Africa theory teaches us that. Anthropologists have looked and looked and looked and looked, but still have yet to find older bones, older Homo sapien bones that are outside of Africa. East Africa, that is. And Egypt is in East Africa. But so those are those experiences. And then like towards the end of my stay, I started to spend time in Upper Egypt, which is where you find all the black Egyptians pretty much. And these people don't come from Asia. They don't come from the Arabian Peninsula. They don't come from Turkey. They don't come from Europe like all the other Egyptians do. They come from the continent of Africa, where Egypt is. Egypt is in the continent of Africa, right? And I mean, these people don't speak Arabic because they're not Arab, and Arabs don't come from Egypt. These people speak Nubian. They speak Nubian, an ancient 7,000-year-old language that originated in Egypt and Sudan. Oh, and let me just say, Egypt and Sudan were the same country up until the 1800s. And no one would ever try to argue and say that Sudanese people aren't black. They some of the blackest people on this planet, okay? And I'm just saying, like, Sudan and Egypt were the same country for thousands and thousands of years. Okay, all right, well, forget that. And I just want to say that that's my story time. I've had multiple people tell me, I personally don't think I look Egyptian, but you know, even Nubians have told me that I look like them, and they're definitely Egyptian. They're like the first tribe, one of the very first original tribes of Egypt, ethnic groups in Egypt, and they still speak a 7,000-year-old Pharaonic language. No other group of people in Egypt still speak a Pharaonic language. Like, no other group. Not the Arabs, because they don't come from Egypt. Not the Turkish, because they don't come from Egypt. Not the Europeans, because they don't come from Egypt. Everybody speaks a broken pidgin Arabic language. Ancient Egyptians did not speak Arabic. Oh, but we have this group of people that don't speak Arabic as a first language, but speak an ancient 7,000-year-old Pharaonic language. I mean, something as obvious as this, I mean, it's beyond me how people can still say, oh, Egyptians are North African. First of all, North African is not an ethnicity. That's a region in Africa. There's South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa. That's not an ethnicity. South Africa is not an ethnicity. East Africa is not an ethnicity. I mean, North Africa doesn't mean anything. The indigenous people in Africa, period, are black. It's just that simple. And there are woke people in Egypt who know this. But those people who are whitewashed and brainwashed by white supremacy will tell you otherwise. And one of the biggest reasons why people work so hard to disassociate Egypt with the rest of Africa is because it has helped Europeans justify enslaving Africans. Just simple as that. They're like, oh my gosh, there's no way these black people could have ever built a wonderful civilization, even though they did. It's in the hieroglyphics. You see Egyptians wearing braids, afros, dark skin. I mean, and these pictures are thousands of years old. If their skin is still dark brown after thousands of years of wear and tear, you can only imagine how dark their skin was when they first painted those pictures on the temples, in the hieroglyphics. You can only imagine. But yeah, that's all I'm gonna say right now. This was my story time, my little tidbit. Watch out for the trolls. There are plenty of trolls on this channel on my videos. You should say hi to them and encourage them to not be so brainwashed by white supremacy and accept the whitewashed history of an African country. See you later.